What do I need to be good at to be great at something?
Hello, everyone. You are listening to She Leads with Carly. And in this show, we talk to the absolute best, brightest, and yes, badass leaders.
Tap into where your natural curiosity takes you. Just making sure you're not your own roadblock. Even if you do fall, you're going to fall and you're going to learn.
Together, let's build a DNA of what it takes to rise to the top and truly make an impact. I'm your host, Carly Malatsky. Hello, everyone. I am super excited to welcome our guest today, Fiona Tan. Fiona is the Chief Technology Officer at Wayfair, an American e-commerce company that is a destination for all things home, a place to find the right furniture and home goods online. With 25 plus years of experience leading technology teams, Fiona began her professional career working at top technical companies, including Oracle, TIBCO Software and Ariba. At TIBCO, she rose up to be the Vice President of Engineering in her 16-year tenure at this intelligence cloud data company. Prior to Wayfair, Fiona served in executive leadership roles at Walmart, first as a Senior VP of Engineering for Customer Technology at WalmartLabs, and then as a Senior Vice President of U.S. Technology at Walmart. Fiona earned her bachelor's degree in computer science and engineering from MIT and her master's in computer science from Stanford University. Fiona, it's such an honor to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about this time.
Of course. So Fiona, what I love to start off the conversation is tell me a little bit about your childhood. Where are you from? What was 5-year-old, 10-year-old Fiona like?
I grew up in Penang, Malaysia, and Penang is a small island, very, very small, northwest coast of Malaysia, and that's kind of where I grew up. And it was a former British colony, so there was, I guess, more British aspects of kind of growing up in a kind of hodgepodge of there were Chinese people there, Indians, so a lot of folks that settled in Penang and in Malaysia from different parts of, mostly in Asia, but still different sort of cultures. And that was the background that I grew up in. I moved to Singapore when I was 9 with my immediate family. Singapore was looking for teachers at that time. This was, Singapore is a fairly new country. It separated from Malaysia. My parents were both teachers. And so we took the opportunity, moved to Singapore. It has a great education system. And then I eventually came to the US to go to college as a foreign student. But you asked about what 5-year-old Fiona, my childhood nickname was Rascal. So maybe that gives you a little bit of a, look into kind of how I was. I was that kid that kind of couldn't sit still. That was one of my things. I wanted to be in everything, running around constantly. And so, yeah, that was my nickname. I was Rascal.
I love that. And so my guess, given that both of your parents were teachers, did they instill that importance of education, and did that pass through you, that passion for studying?
Yeah, I think in general, I would say it is, it's certainly a very cultural thing anyway, where we grew up. Education was always something that, even in families where perhaps the parents weren't quite as educated, I think education was very much thought about as the way for the next generation to succeed, have a better life, etc. So that was always already a cultural thing. And you top it off with both parents being teachers. It certainly was very much part of my upbringing. Was just that was something that my siblings, it was a big emphasis was on education. The other part that was interesting, and that was the part that was maybe a little bit different for me and my family versus others, was my dad played a lot of sports growing up. He was a very good athlete, and especially in tennis. And so it was a family thing, right? So besides studying, he also was very much, he believed very strongly, and I actually really appreciate and grateful for him that playing a sport and doing that really well was also very important in sort of the general goodness in terms of building you up as a person. And so my my siblings and I, we played tennis from pretty young. My father coached us. I played all the way through college, played a little bit after college, but it was one of those things where we knew it wasn't a thing where I didn't think that I was ever going to play tennis professionally, but to be able to still play it competitively, and it brought a lot, I think, in terms of just my journey in general as a person. But certainly, I think if I look even at my career, I think the sort of rigor of playing a sport, competing, time management, etc., and it's something like tennis where you're trying to figure out, how to beat your opponent. I think those things are really important skills that I've used throughout.
And we'll dive into it even more, because I'm sure there are so many skills that you've implemented and that draw a parallel with, leading these tech teams at these big companies. So that's incredible. But even before that, was it very clear that you were going to go study in the US? Because you mentioned you were in Singapore and you made your way to the US to MIT. Was that a very clear, easy decision, or was there some friction in that?
The interesting part about my family is my maternal grandmother actually worked for the U.S. Embassy in Penang. She was the U.S. Information Service. The embassy was actually in KL. But her job was actually around advising and helping kids who wanted to study in the U.S. So she had done sort of business trips to the U.S. and visited all the colleges. So, which is very unusual. Again, we're a British colony, right? Ex-British colony. So most kids who were going to go away to college went to England, Australia, because that was sort of how our education system was sort of preparing us for. So it was a very kind of a little bit at that time, especially a anomalous decision that I wanted to make. But I was very much influenced. My grandmother and I were very, very close. And so she definitely influenced the choice around picking, coming to the US to go to college. And partly also it was just sort of my personality. I always was very intrigued about the adventure of going away to college. I think I remember even when I was like the little 7-year-old, 8-year-old, I think in Penang, I told my parents I wanted to go to boarding school in the UK, and they're like, "No, you're not." but then when it came to college, like I said, my grandmother really helped a lot in terms of helping me with that, and I think my parents were sort of. It wasn't like they weren't supportive, but they weren't going to be too encouraging either. And they figured if I could figure it out, and if I managed to do all the applications, and if I managed to get in, then they would be supportive. And so that's essentially what happened. And so I, got in and packed my little bags and went away. And this was the times when, in those days, I'll date myself, but we didn't do college visits, and I had never been to the US before. My one maternal grandmother had, but none of us had otherwise. So you land in this extremely different country for the first time, and you go to college. It's a different experience than it is now. I mean, we're so much more connected. The world is so much smaller now, right? That it sounds weird, but I had that Peterson's Guide to Colleges. It's a big book, and that's what I looked through to decide which college I wanted to go to.
That is incredible. And it seems like you mentioned, when you wanted to go to boarding school, it seems like you've always had maybe this sense of independence or curiosity to go explore. So that's amazing. So I mentioned in the intro, you studied computer science and engineering. And obviously this, gave you a great platform for the rest of your career. When were you first introduced to coding and computer science? And was that an initial spark in that passion right away there?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I hadn't done a whole lot in high school, back in Singapore. I mean, I knew I was always very much more of a math and science girl, right? I mean, I would be much happier doing 100 math problems than writing one essay. And during those times, right, it wasn't really something that would pop in someone's head right away. It wasn't a natural choice. But when I went to MIT and kind of took my first coding class, it's sort of just like this spark went off in my head, or my light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, this is great. This is like puzzle solving. It's it's really interesting. I love doing it, and turns out, I think I'm going to be able to make money doing this. So it was it sort of came together. So I didn't come in with a predisposition around computer science. In fact, I thought I would do engineering, because that was a career path that there was a little bit more history, right? So you understood what that meant. But when I found that I actually really preferred computer science and the little bit of the creativity around that, and again, a lot of us around optimizing problem solving, which I had a penchant for and just I still enjoy doing. And you find it also just in other parts of your life. I'm constantly trying to optimize, right? Like which line's the shortest, how's the best way to get a good price on something? I'm always trying to figure out, or a recipe, right? How do you make it better? I'm constantly doing that. So I found that this was a career path that was a good fit, I think, for my personality and my interests.
Yeah. And Fiona, mind you, I love, first you talk about it so, casually, right? Like, yes, doing computer engineering at MIT, which is one of the top schools in the country, mind you. And so I want to know, around this time, it was around the early 1990s, maybe a little bit before, what was that environment like? Were there many other women like you in the class? Was it a very independent experience, or were you able to actually lean on others?
Yeah, so there weren't very many women in computer science and engineering. I remember there were three of us that did a lot of classes together. But there were a lot of guys, and I think this was before we talked a lot about, hey, diversity and sort of what the ratios were. It was just like, okay, well, there's a class of whatever, X number of people, and there's three of us. That's fine. We'll just go, And so our study groups, probably more guys and girls, but it's interesting. I never really thought about it that much, I think now we're more aware of the sort of disparity in sort of the numbers, and I actually think it seemed like, even though it was small numbers at that time in terms of percentages of women that were in computer science, I think it actually got a little worse after that. So I have to go back and look at it, but I remember one time looking at it going, shoot, I thought that was small, but then it seemed like it even got a little bit smaller, which is unfortunate. But yeah, so yes, there weren't very many other girls, but I think there were obviously a lot of guys, and we sort of banded together anyways. I didn't really think too much about it. Sometimes I think that's also a little bit about playing sports and just, it didn't occur to me so much around like, hey, look, should I be doing this? Should I not be doing this? I'm like, I like it. I'm going to do it. So.
And Fiona, even building off of that, right? Do you think that there's this world, because on the one hand, it's so important to talk about it, to talk about how the numbers aren't there and how we need to increase it and all of that. But in a way, there's also power in your approach of saying, you know what? I didn't even think about it. I wasn't going to let anyone stop me. I wasn't going to let the environment stop me. What do you think we can do today to kind of mitigate, kind of putting us down in a way and not letting anything stop us? Like, do you think we should have that kind of, blindness to the outside in a sense?
It's so hard, because I think there are aspects of, for example, me being a little bit, just maybe ignorant or whatever, just not really understanding the whole landscape around me, and maybe in that little bit of ignorance that was it was actually maybe helpful. I do think there's a little bit of that which can be good to overlay. I think the having more visibility and transparency and understanding what the situation is, so that we can help look at, hey, look, where are the drop-offs? Why are girls not thinking about going into computer science? And I think just having the knowledge can help us maybe put together the foundation so that it actually improves. I don't think ignorance is necessarily the best way to go about it, but there's also something around, like, if you tend to go to that too quickly, right? So, hey, look, you didn't get promoted, or something didn't go the way you wanted. That's my only fear, is sometimes if we think, hey, look, it's because maybe there was some discriminatory practices, and maybe there were, but maybe there wasn't, right? And I do sometimes feel like if the ignorance part of it is sometimes helpful, because you don't think that way, and then you just go, okay, what could I have done better, right? And versus thinking, hey, look, maybe there was something against me that was sort of more structural, or it was, so I think there's something there. That's kind of how I've sort of thought about it, because I have been asked that question. I'm like, shoot, I really didn't think about it. And it's like, if I thought about it, would I have acted differently? I don't know.
Right. Yeah. And then, so afterwards, like I said, you got your master's at Stanford University in computer science. By the way, at this time, were you still playing tennis?
Mm-hmm. I was playing, but I'd already used up my eligibility, my 4 years at MIT. And then, there were a lot of grad students who were sort of on tennis teams and other places too, similarly. So there was a tournament tennis class. I don't know if that was on when you were there. Yeah, so I was still playing, and I was playing a little bit outside on my own as well. just because, I've been competing all the way since I was like 9 years old. And so it was a hard habit to break. So I was still playing a little bit. Yeah.
And even to keep on that, before we go on to this illustrious technical career that you've had, I actually recently talked to Emily Hughes. She was an Olympic figure skater on the podcast. And I talked to her about what was that transition like? That identity crisis that we all have. I had it too, coming away from Stanford soccer, of being like, who am I? What am I? All of these questions that you ask when you don't have your sport. I'm so curious, did you have that experience too as you went into the professional world and put tennis aside?
There was a little bit of that, for sure, because, it is interesting, right? Because you're so used to so much, X amount of time per day, per week, whatever it is practice, right? And then weekends, it's competing, right? So there's a little bit of that where at first you're like, oh, I have all this free time. And then after that, you kind of miss it a little bit, right? So there was definitely a little bit of a transition. It was funny when I first started working, I was at Oracle, which honestly in those days seemed like an extension of college because we hired so many kids right out of school. And Oracle had a tennis team that was actually pretty strong. And so, so I managed to wean myself slowly over some number of years in terms of tennis, just because I also had that. And then after that, I had kids, and then I made them play tennis. So it was still
naturally, of course.
Yes, of course.
And then you ultimately, like you said, you went to Oracle and then TIBCO Software, where you spent 16 years, and you ended up being the VP of engineering there. Walk me a little bit through that experience, also from the lens of choosing to continue to stay at a company, because today that's not the norm. Like people stay 2 years and then they go look for their next role. How were you thinking of your career and staying at this company as you were going through it?
That's a really good question. And I think, I kind of grew up there. If you think about, I started TIBCO in my 20s and I left when I was in, close to 40, I think it was. But one of the things was just being in the same company. And I think it depends on what company, right? TIBCO was quite interesting because when I first started, it had just been bought by Reuters. So we were part of a British company. And then at some point Reuters split us out. We went public. So there was the whole kind of, how do you take a company public? How do you take technology that was built very much for the financial and industry? And how do you actually create a product line that now is applicable to a whole bunch of different industries, et cetera. So the company changed so much. So even though it was the same company, there was a lot of interesting growth and different trajectories that I got to experience and be a part of. And there are advantages of being in a place for that long. In a way, there were things that I could do and people that I knew already. So you kind of have you've been around a while. There's certain things I could do more easily, right? And the other part I would overlay is that's also when I had my kids, and so in a way, being able to feel like I could do my job really well, but then also have the ability to sort of raise the children, because I didn't stop working. I pretty much had the kids and went back to work, but in a way, going back to a place that was familiar, where I had a lot of history and there was a lot of trust, was helpful for me.
Yeah.
So it ended up being, for me, it worked out in terms of my career trajectory. I could probably have left a little bit sooner than I ended up doing. I think the other thing that's always been important for me is the people that I work with. And for better or worse, I think I've made a lot of career decisions also around like, who would the team be that I would be working with? And, I was, for a long time, I enjoyed myself and really got an opportunity to do a lot of different things. I had a manager for the first, I think 9 years of my time there that was just such an amazing champion and advocate for me. And so that's some of the benefits of being at a company for a long time. I haven't been anywhere else for 16 years, but in general, I think that's still, I was at Walmart for about almost 7 years. So I do tend to stay at companies probably more so.
I like how you said, because even while you were having kids, it was almost a sense of stability that you could always lean on. And that was super important at that time, especially as a woman, raising a family at the same time. I think you also need that. So that's great. And during that time, you obviously end up being the VP of engineering. Was there a sense of self-advocacy that you had to do in order to rise up those rankings? Or did you almost have a champion that was there for you too?
Yeah, no, I definitely had a champion. My manager at that time, BJ Teller, he's wonderful. He's still a good friend. He's still someone that I reach out to for advice, career decisions, etc. But he was one that always would push me, probably a little bit outside of my comfort zone even. It's like, you can do this. And I think he was almost always right? It's like when he felt like I could do something, I really could. And it was just, I didn't think about it myself initially, right? That to go and say, hey, look, I can. But then after that, I did more of the self-advocacy, probably starting after about 10 years or so of working. Like I'd say, hey, look, I think I can do this, right? Let me raise my hand and I can do this. And felt more comfortable doing that.
And that was just because you already had that experience and confidence under your belt. So you were able to just speak up?
Yeah, I think so.
And what advice do you have maybe for others who, one, don't have that champion, but they do feel that they're able to, they have that ability and those skills to do it, but that one last step to actually get there is missing. What do you think others can do in order to get there?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of it is actually just being confident enough to raise your hand and being comfortable stretching yourself. And a lot of it's around the fact is that actually the way you can tell that you are going to be stretching yourself is that you're not comfortable, right? So in a way, it's a little bit of a test for yourself, is kind of going, if you waited till you were super, super comfortable with it, you probably waited too long. Sometimes is kind of how I think about it. But in a way, that's the part around like, if you're going to stretch yourself, that's the part around the stability and the history and the trust that people have with you. And that's why sometimes I think it actually, there are good reasons for you to stay at a company where you can build on that and sort of making those moves maybe easier. Sometimes in a company where you're already doing well, right? And so, when you say, hey, look, I think I'd like to go open up the development center in India or China, and you've never done it before, but they're like, we trust her. She kind of, generally does a good job with other stuff, right? But if you're going to go to a brand new company and you haven't had that experience, it's a little bit more of a hard sell, right? Sure. That's kind of what I ended up doing. And like I said, the initial part, I had a lot of support and advocacy. And then I think as I was able to prove to myself, like, oh, actually, I can do this. And then it's like, hey, you raise your hand, you kind of go, hey, look, can I do this? And for the most part, what I've done was I tried to take on some of those new things sort of in addition to my old roles. So I felt like there was something I was comfortable with, I knew I could deliver. And I had, I had a track record, I could do that. And then I'll say, hey, I think I can additionally take on this new area as well. And so it wasn't like a completely, everything was new and different. It was, you're stretching yourself in an area that you don't know as well, but there's still a corpus of work that you feel like you could do really well. And that's going to help you with this new part that you don't know. Yeah. That's kind of how I sort of thought about it.
I love that. I really like that framework because it is something that we can take with us of, you feel that you're maybe getting too comfortable. So what is next? That you're going to learn something new, but then, there is that familiarity. You've done something of that new job before. So it's almost finding that balance, but ensuring that at the end of the day, you're still learning and growing and being a little uncomfortable, which is great.
Yeah.
So after TIBCO, again, 16 years, and then you end up going to Ariba and Walmart. I would love to just almost get in your mind of how did you view these new opportunities? What were you optimizing for? Was it the leadership role, like the title? Was it the people, like you said? How were you thinking through, okay, this is the next company I need to go to?
The decision to leave TIBCO, it was a little bit, and that's the one where, I've asked, it probably could have, like I said, could have probably left a few years earlier, but it was the part around recognizing, hey, look, I'm getting way too comfortable here. And am I pushing myself enough, right? And then the other was a little bit more on the technology stack and where things were moving and evolving, and sort of my view around like, hey, this was sort of pre-cloud as we know it, but a lot of capabilities were moving more off premise to software as a service, et cetera. And TIBCO was trying, but we were having a heck of a time trying to figure that out. And I was like, this is a sort of like an evolution from a tech perspective that I wanted to be a part of, and wasn't going to be able to do that at TIBCO. So then that's the part around sort of, again, with that framework is like, hey, look, I want to do something in enterprise software in a field that I understand, but I want to do it in a different environment, right? So moving from on-premise software to cloud, at that time they called it cloud, was really more software as a service. And Ariba, I thought at that time was probably one of the biggest sort of enterprise software run as a service. And so that was the part around something different, but something that was still familiar. And it was a big change, I will say, after being 16 years at a company. I remember the first week at Ariba, I'm like, I have no idea how to be a new person. I was like, I don't know what to do.
Because you got too comfortable in a way.
It was very uncomfortable that first week. I'm like, wah. What did I do? Was that a good idea? But it was actually great. Ariba was an awesome company. Like I said, in a way, we were very operationally efficient, and a lot of things that I learned about how to operate software as a service, which was very different from what was at TIBCO. And then also during my tenure, Ariba got acquired by SAP. So then also being sort of being part of SAP as a much bigger company. So it was I really, really enjoyed my time at Ariba, and I wasn't looking to leave, but as luck would have it, right? The recruiter at Walmart used to work with me at TIBCO, and she reached out. She said, "There's this amazing role. It's very different from what you've done, but they need somebody with good enterprise software skills and background and being able to scale and you should talk to this leader. I think you're going to really like him." So this was Jeremy King. He was the CTO at that time of Walmart Global E-commerce. And I remember having a conversation with Jeremy, and during the interview, I'm like, just so we're clear, I've never done e-commerce. I've not done consumer-based software. I haven't done anything in retail, but I know how to shop. So if you're good with that, I would love to have this opportunity. So it was a big shift. It's very different from, when you're building enterprise technology, enterprise software, you're trying to build capabilities for other technology companies for the most part, or other companies to use, right? And so you're sort of very much in the mindset of being a producer and producing in a way where, a whole bunch of different people can make use of what you produced. And then you go to a place like Walmart in terms of tech, I'm the biggest consumer, right? I'm like, I don't care about anybody else's use case. I only care about my use case. And my use case is ginormous, right? The scale of Walmart and what it needs to do.
Yeah, and not only that, I feel like with Walmart shifting to consumer from enterprise, and maybe this is wrong, but my initial hunch is that it feels almost more tangible. Like if code breaks or something happens, it feels even more scary. Like millions of normal people can't fulfill their needs, and they can't shop. Did that play a role into just the overall, your role as a leader?
Yeah. So, it's interesting you asked that question. The first thing that hit me was, when I worked at TIBCO or even Ariba, SAP, and you have dinner conversations and they ask, where do you work? You say TIBCO or whatever, and everybody's like, yeah, whatever. And then that's the end of that conversation. When you'd say you work at Walmart, there was a lot more like, oh, and everything that you asked about, like, in terms of impact to people. I mean, everything from like my mother would be like, hey, I went to the store today and blah, 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 blah. It would range from like they were out of whatever to like, I was talking to somebody. And so everybody had an opinion, and it definitely from an impact perspective, it was much bigger. Actually, when we were rolling out Walmart groceries, so essentially the ability to order your groceries online, be able to pick it up in the store, which was, something that I'm still extremely proud of. I do think that was quite a big game changer for Walmart. I remember on the weekends, I had one of the guys that used to work for me, and we would joke that we were always talking on the weekends, because weekends is when people would be going to the store, and when we had some issues, right, it would make the news, right? It would be like the entire Eastern Seaboard can't get their groceries because Fiona and Kevin couldn't get their act together, right? So.
And it's funny, by the way, because, like your mom or getting a message from a friend being like, Walmart's out of toilet paper. Can you help out? And like, that's not totally in your purview. But anyway, it carries that impact and that title. So that's incredible. And you mentioned even first week of Ariba, maybe the first week of Walmart, there's that, growing pains, if you will. How did you deal during those moments, or almost, excuse my language, but like shit hit the fan, those type of moments? How did you deal with that? And were you able to keep a calm mentality throughout it all?
I think I did. Yeah, I think certainly two separate things. Right? I think one about just being new, that was something that I just had to relearn what it meant to, hey, who do you ask questions, etc. I think one thing I would say has been helpful for me in my career is actually just recognizing and being very honest with myself when I don't know something. I'm very happy and I'm very quick to come to that conclusion and then going and asking. I also think that asking nicely is underrated. You get a lot of things done just asking nicely, I think. But yeah, I think it was just, recognizing that, hey, look, where I came from a place where I knew where everything was. And now there's a lot where I don't even know where to start. And so just, kind of relearning that and asking questions and all, I think was something that was very helpful as I kind of came into these new environments. And same thing with Walmart, right? There's, we're joking, but there's some things just because almost everybody, right? 90% of the U.S. population shops at Walmart at least once a year, right? So the large part of the country, we all have experienced Walmart. So I had that experience as a consumer, and so there were things that I understood, but then there were a lot of other things that were new, and so it's just being honest about like. And I guess that was the thing. I never felt too nervous about asking questions. I've always felt like it's just better to ask, and do the research, ask, and it sort of saves a lot of time around like I don't have to pretend that I know when I don't know.
For sure. And you've obviously, I'm guessing you've hired a bunch of people throughout your career. What were key indicators for you that always stood out to you to be like, what, this person would be an incredible teammate?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think a lot of it was, obviously you want to make sure that they have the right technical expertise, et cetera, et cetera. But then I think the mindset is also important, right? So I think I've always tried to. I feel like it for me it was useful to surround myself with people that had some of the, if I've got certain blind spots, right? So making sure that I have somebody on my team that has is better skilled at that, right? So it was in a little bit, you talk about putting together a team. It's really that, right? If you think about, for example, in soccer, not everybody does the same thing, right? You have people playing different roles. And so it's like a little bit, I kind of use that mentality in terms of like, how do I put together the team? And then a lot of it's around like, you want to ideally put together a team that's going to be, you want them to be diverse enough so that everybody has different skill sets, but also there's that common thread where you feel like we can all sort of, row in the same direction and we're going to be happy rowing in that same direction. And so those are the parts where I don't know. I mean, there's not really, I don't know how to exactly say, there's no test for that, right? I think a lot of it's just around how sharing certain beliefs around like how do you develop people, or how do you think about problem solving, and so I don't know if I can say exactly how to do it, but those are the things that I feel like are important.
It's almost like filling up a team, like a sports team. It's like, where are the gaps and where can I fill that in, and what makes that great teammate. So I think that's amazing. I'm sure now, as you've had these leadership roles, was there ever a moment that you miss the actual nitty gritty, sitting in front of a computer, coding? Like, how was that transition to coding from like managing a team and having a whole new set of tools that you have to use?
There definitely have been times when you're like, I would love to just go into an office or and just be able to code, because it was so much easier at that time to be able to measure your success. I feel like, a little bit, right? It's like, okay, I had, whatever, 3 defects to fix and I fixed them all. And so there was a little bit of that. It was easier. And so I think the transition, I think the biggest thing was initially, if I remember back to sort of my first job as a manager, and how you transition from essentially doing the work to sort of helping others do the work without doing the work itself, right? So I think transitioning to being able to trust and lead, and when do you step in and when do you not? It's a constant thing as you're leading through, right? Because I think now when I look at it, it's like I probably parachute into areas when I need to, and it could be a different area at different times, like who needs help, and kind of going in, but at the same time, you do need to be able to leverage and trust your staff to be able to do what they need to do, and but at the same time, I want to make sure I'm removing blockers for them, jumping into help when needed, but balancing.
Right. Now it almost shifts to being like, can my team be the most successful that they can be and code the most efficiently and effectively and everything?
Yeah, because right now that's all it is, isn't it? It's like the better that I can enable and whatever roadblocks I can do to remove for them, and however I can make my team successful, that's it. That's all that matters, right? Because then I'm successful.
I mentioned in the intro, but Fiona, you are now the Chief Technology Officer at Wayfair, a public company, CTO. How is that? Tell me about that experience of being at the top tier you can get to at a public company. What is that experience like, and how has it been for you?
It's been exciting. So to your point, right, I think a lot of it's around, growing up my career, there was always somebody else that I could count on that could, I could bounce ideas off of. And I was like, hey, there's still somebody, right? And so now it's like, oh, shoot, like all the technology decisions in the company, right, they do land on me. But that's been really exciting. I think being part of the leadership team, and that's one of the things I have enjoyed about being, if I think about shifting over to sort of more consumer or sort of more tech-enabled companies versus a tech company, there's so much interesting, topics going on in the business or the operational aspects of Wayfair. Because Wayfair, obviously, at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we help everybody everywhere find the perfect items for their home, right? But it's not a tech. We use a lot of technology, and we're a very, very tech forward company. But the end that you're trying to achieve is still is still something that's not tech, right? And so that's been interesting. So what I found to be especially in a company like that, understanding the business and the everything from the economy to the how the sector is doing, to kind of translating that to how can I best use tech to help enable that, or operations, right? We've got fulfillment centers across the country. We're trying to ensure that we can get, so we've got folks that are working in the fulfillment centers and providing customer service, etc. What are the things I can do to help enable them is also super important. So the thing that's really neat is being part of a leadership team that, you sort of depending, all the functions are depending on each other to kind of, at the end of the day, it really is that. It's like, I want to make sure everybody everywhere can buy something for their home that they feel like is really special to them.
And what would you say on the opposite side? What is the most challenging aspect of being in this type of role?
It's also understanding when, in a way, like when good enough is good enough, right? Because I don't need to have the world's best technology architecture. I don't need to write papers about it, but I need to make sure that it is good enough and it's very solid. But at the end of the day, it's also still like, hey, there's a long tail potentially. Sometimes it's important to do, and it's just trying to understand where you draw that line, I think, has been an interesting one, right? Because it is different when, I actually, I think honestly, in general, I think understanding when good enough is a very important skill to have in life in general.
Yeah.
But I think also for technologists, because, a lot of times, we're, as engineers, we're like, we want to get it perfect, right? And like, actually, you know what? Perfect is not what we're going for. We want to make sure that we're getting it good enough because you need to enable something, right? And so having that balance, I think, has been an interesting thing to kind of continue to work through.
I really like that. I haven't actually heard that yet of that concept of good enough, because often when you get to that level, it's common to be a perfectionist or have this in your mind where it has to be perfect. And only that, you're relying on others to get to that level of perfect. But it's realizing and recognizing that, it's not, sometimes speed matters, and sometimes you have so many consumers that you're gearing towards. So it's almost reaching that level of good enough. That's so interesting.
Yeah, I think a lot of that too is, again, when you're working, you're running a business, there are constraints, right? Meaning that, hey, look, if I can do this more efficiently, I can, the business can do better, right? So you have some constraints where you do have to kind of go, well, there are diminishing returns past a certain point. And so you need to be able to recognize that and go, actually, that's good. That's why the good enough is important, because then you can go, okay, now that's good enough. I can do something else. And because that something else will get me more incremental value. And I think sometimes the concept of the fact that you do have constraints sort of it's actually an important and valuable thing, because I think it forces you, right? It's a good forcing function to be efficient, to be innovative about, like, and also to be able to call it when it's good enough.
Yeah. Fiona, when you look back at your career and even talking through it now, do you wish there were moments that you did differently throughout your career?
Yeah, I'm sure there are many. There are certain, everything from like, we thought, some of it is just like, hey, there were projects where we had a lot of conviction that this was going to be the right thing to do, or it was going to give us so much value, and it didn't. I mean, there's definitely a bunch of those. I think a lot of it's, again, back to calling it, pivoting, and just realizing when, hey, look, you gave it a good effort, you're not seeing the results you expected, and almost giving yourself the grace to kind of go, it's okay, pivot, right? Because that's one thing I feel like is also important, is you don't keep going down a path because you're not willing to give up an idea. I would say so there have been a bunch of those, and I've found that there are really just great learning experiences, right? To being able to sort of take that and kind of use it for the next time around. And I think calling it and just kind of going, okay, that was a bad call.
Right.
I thought that was a good decision. Clearly not. And just having those very honest discussions early on when you realize that that's it's going awry has been important as well.
And we touched on this a bit when you were studying at MIT and Stanford, almost the environment and how you and 3 other women, maybe 2 other women, were in the classroom. And I want to know, obviously there aren't many female CTOs either, and you've really been a trailblazer in that sense, and like sharing your story. That's honestly such a reason for She Leads, is to share this story and almost inspire these women to get to that role. Where do you see that women can do more, or at least advice for women to enter STEM, but then also stick with it, and continue down that path? Where do you think we fall short?
Such a good question. I think I do think beginning early on, I would say from like middle school for girls is where we start. I think the problem, right? Because I have a daughter, and I saw that. And that was the big difference in her, how she grew up, and versus for me, it's like I never, growing up in Penang, math and science, just culturally were always things that there was a lot of emphasis on, just culturally, with the Asian culture, very big emphasis on that. It didn't matter if you were eventually going to be a scientist or a teacher or a dancer, whatever. Math and science was still important. It just was the grounding. That was sort of like the philosophy of education. I realized after talking to, as watching my daughter grow up, the cultural part here is almost the opposite. For my daughter, she was like, well, I'm actually good at it, but I don't think nobody else is doing it. All my friends don't. This is not, So it was me kind of, I had to step in and go, no, it's really good. And I still do. And it's not for anything else, but I really do believe that it is an amazing career path for women. It's, it's in a way, if you think about it, it's a lot more objective, right? It's a very quantitative field. You've written code as well. You write code, a guy writes code, it doesn't matter, right? The machine doesn't differentiate or give bias towards the guy who wrote the piece of code. So there's a lot of really good things about it. And so I think it's like, just how do you approach and make it a interesting, exciting field for women early on is super important. Because if they don't think about it, then it's super hard to go into college, right? Say you didn't, and then suddenly decide I think it's still possible, but it makes it a lot harder. And also by then, if there's a certain mindset, it's been sort of, it's hard to make that switch. And then I think as people are going to their careers, one thing I found, which was interesting, because it happened to me, and is I think as women too, in general, I'm going to make these generalizations, whatever, but like, I do feel like we multitask better, because if you think about it, even in a family, right, with a spouse, you're still responsible for the household and the children, generally speaking, right? So in general, I think we're much better at multitasking and organizing things, etc. And so sometimes I want to think it's well intentioned, but there have been times when I've been asked, hey, look, would you want to go into much more of an operational role or a program management role,
Right.
and sort of straying more away from technology into things that are more sort of organizational, because we've got good skills that way. And sometimes these may even be promotion type situations, right? But I think, unfortunately, that ends up being the case that, it's more and more women do that. Then they move away from sort of technology roles, which, you do need to stay somewhat steep still in technology leadership, right? So that's one of the things I did find, myself at certain points in time kind of going, oh, somebody's asking me because they really need help and they think I could do this. And I know I can, but it's like, well, actually, I don't want to give up solving problems and optimizing and all the things I loved about computer science, right? So that was sort of a conscious decision I had to make.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because one, I think it's true. I think people, get swayed into other directions, and it's that conviction and that ability to say, no, I'm actually going to stay. And if I do stay, there is room. Like, I could get up and rise up the ladder. And even to your point about middle school, I'll even argue, I talked to Sylvia Acevedo. She's the former CEO of Girl Scouts. And so for her, she's seen that even when you're 5 years old, the boys are playing with Legos and are learning to build and create these structures out of Legos, and the girls are pushed out of that circle and are playing with Barbies. And so almost the discourse and the culture is actually developed so early on.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important, like you said, that cultural and the external environment is such an important part of it too. So I think it's something that we're definitely changing and we'll continue to change, but even just having this discussion and that recognition is so important. So thank you for that. And Fiona, what I love to do, I love to ask these questions to finish us off. But first, what is the most significant thing you've changed your mind about over the past decade?
Yeah. That's, I was thinking about it. I was like, I think it was having pets.
Okay.
It's again, growing up where I grew up, and then in Singapore, we grew up in apartments and stuff. So it was just never really quite a thing. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm with a partner, and he's always had pets and really believes in having a pet and how that changes your life. And it actually, I do. I'm a huge believer now. I have a cat, and there's just something that. Miru's is he's a Bengal cat, and there's just something very comforting about, and somehow I feel like he can sense moods, and I think just caring for a pet is a good thing. So, anyways, that's one of the things. I'm sure there are others, but
yeah, no, you've been converted into a pet lover. I love that. My last one. This is my favorite one. But what craft are you spending a lifetime honing?
I think it's cooking, because I love to eat. And I mentioned earlier, I approach cooking, and it's like this, I'm constantly trying to make it better, right? And I've always been asked, like, what's your favorite thing to cook? It's like, my favorite thing to cook is whatever is your favorite thing to eat, right? And I want to make sure that I want to do that as best as I can. And so it's been a good outlet for sort of my personality and things. And then what I get out of it is something hopefully that is lovely and people enjoy. And so it's been, for me, it has become kind of a lifelong kind of passion. And so that's what I would think.
And it is something that you can always improve. You've never reached the pinnacle in a sense. So I love that. That's great. All right, Fiona, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. I've learned so much. So really, thank you for coming on She Leads.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you too.
Thank you so much for listening to the show this week. If you enjoyed, please spread the word. Tell someone about She Leads or post about it on social media and tag us. If you want to contact us, feel free to send over a message through the She Leads Instagram page at sheleads.show. If you want to follow us on Twitter, our account is @SheLeadsShow, and mine is @Carly Malatsky. This episode was produced and edited by Nick Verschow. Thank you also to our partner, Floodgate. If you're passionate about startups and want to learn more about the starting journey of those who have built groundbreaking companies, I highly recommend listening to Starting Greatness with Mike Maples Jr., the founding partner of Floodgate. He has an incredible show that, in my opinion, is definitely worth your time. Thanks again.